Welcome to Uncontained, episode 173. I'm your host, Aaron Static Render, and on the show today, I'm actually flipping things around a little bit. Normally, I'm the one doing the interviewing, and my guest is answering the questions. Well, this week, I'm actually giving you a look into me as a guest. Yes, that's right. Back in January, I was on the Instagram Stories podcast hosted by Daniel Hill. And I was on episode 16 of that show talking about how I use Instagram to promote the podcast. And I was able to ask him a few questions on how to grow my following, including about engagement groups and also how to deal with fluctuation of followers, like people who add you just to delete you, just to build their follower numbers up, and if it's worth it to follow them for a bit anyway, even if they're just gonna dump you. But I won't tell you all about the interview right away. I'll just I'll let you listen to it, and I'll be back with some more shows here coming up shortly. I got a few interviews all lined up and ready for you, but I just wanted to give you a look on the other side. So please enjoy. This is me being interviewed by Daniel Hill on the Instagram Stories podcast, way back on episode 16 of his show. Please enjoy.
Hi, and welcome to my podcast, The Instagram Stories. I'm Daniel Hill, Instagram educator. What I do on this podcast is interview people who have used the platform very well to get their tips, tricks, secrets, and all the good stuff that you want to know. I also take the time to teach people who are new to the platform what they need to know and give them suggestions about how they can improve their use of the platform. If you find this podcast helpful, valuable, or educational in any way, please do me a favor. Go on the iTunes store and write a review of this podcast. If you have specific feedback for me, or you'd like to work together on a project, have me speak at your event or something else, please email me at daniel@danielhillmedia.com. Again, that's daniel@danielhillmedia.com. Here's today's show. On today's episode, I spent some time talking with Aaron Render, who has a podcast called Uncontained. We talk about some marketing strategies that he can use for his podcast on Instagram, and we talk about what he's tried with some success, and I make some recommendations for what other things he might try. Before you listen to the episode, I'm going to ask you to take just a moment, and if you can, please go on the iTunes store and write a review of this podcast. The couple of minutes it takes you to write a review of this podcast really help me to get more listeners, which I would really appreciate. And then it helps me to make more free content, and I feel encouraged. I feel like people are listening, which is awesome for me and for you. So if you can, please search the Instagram Stories on iTunes and leave me a review. If you have some feedback or something you think I should work on or do differently, let me know, and I'll take care of that. At the end of the podcast, listen for a special offer, which I will send to you. Here's today's episode. So today on the show, we have Aaron Render. Aaron, welcome.
Hey, man. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
So, Aaron, for those of us who aren't familiar with you, can you tell us what you do and what you're all about?
Yeah, of course. I have a podcast called Uncontained, where I interview people in the entertainment industry, like actors, musicians, comedians. And I get, there's two parts to my show, as I was telling you a little bit earlier. Like the first part's kind of very conversational, seeing what they're up to, what they're working on, kind of where their roots come from and all that. And then the second part is more for my listeners who want to get into the entertainment industry. So I ask for advice, like first of all, basic advice on what they'd do, for what they'd give for somebody who is looking to get started out, then how they promote themselves. And then also my final question is, how do you live uncontained? Meaning, like, despite people telling you that
this whole podcasting thing won't work out. You should have a backup plan for it or whatnot. What was it that kept you going? Or if you had a bad show, what was it that kept you coming back?
Awesome. That's definitely a thing because I think people want to be in that industry. People want to be in that field. And, a lot of people will take your money for advice, but it must be, a really good feeling when you can help people just for the sake of helping them because they want to be involved in that particular industry.
Exactly, man. And I like to kind of get specific per industry. Say I'm talking to a musician, I like to get advice for people who are looking to get into the music scene, or a comedian for people who are like in comedy, get that advice because it's not necessarily the same for every genre of entertainment, but there are some definite common threads. One of them's just getting out there and doing it.
Sure. How have things gone for you on Instagram in general?
I am slowly building. It's like kind of I take 2 steps forward, 1 step back as far as followers go. Like I'm right around, say, 700 right now. I've been kind of going after it a little bit for the last, year and a half, focusing on it more the last 6 months. But, you'll get 700, then you drop down to 685. Then you'll go back up above 700 and drop back down just a little bit. So, you got to expect to see the numbers go up and down a little bit, kind of like the stock market or something.
And that's really frustrating when that happens. I mean, that happens to me too. That happens to everybody. And especially if you have a goal, and you feel like, oh, I'm within striking distance of that goal, whatever it is, if it's 1,000 followers or whatever. And then you feel like, oh, I'm so close. And then you lose a few and gain a few and lose it. And you're like, what is going on? Right. And that's just people doing follow and unfollow, right? That's what causes that number to change so frequently. So that's just part of it, unfortunately.
So do you follow the people who you're like, okay, this person has like 16,000 followers and is only following like 200 people? Are you like prone to not follow them? Or is there a benefit to, even though they'll probably drop you, following them back?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of times you can kind of tell that they're doing the follow unfollow if they just follow you and don't like any of your posts and don't like comment or say like, oh, this looks cool. Or if they do like every single one of your posts in a row and then follow, you kind of like can pick up like, wow, that's not really how a human would do things. You know what I mean? So that kind of gives me some insight. But if I genuinely do like the person's content, I will. Like, to me, what I'm really into and what I like and what I follow are not the same kind of people that follow me. I like to talk about Instagram. I like to talk about building a social strategy and other things with social media. And for some reason, the people who are like, get rich quick on social media, those are the people who follow me, but I know it's a bot, right? So I think you just have to look at what sort of people it is that are being drawn to your account, and are they real people? Do a little detective work to figure that out.
Yeah. What I found is like with me being a podcast and other podcasters, typically if another podcaster around my own size follows me, they're sticking around. But, there seems to be some unspoken code. I may be making that up in my head, but,
Well, generally, if the person follows you for more than a couple of days, it's going to stick, right? But if it's, I'm going to say 48 hours or less, it's probably not going to. So you can kind of judge based on that if they just unfollowed you as quickly as they followed you. I know you wanted to talk about going live. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that's gone and your experiences with going live?
Yeah, sure. So recently I've started when I'm doing my interviews, when I can, is doing Instagram Live, and I find it's really cool when, say, you're in one location, another person's in another location, and use both your accounts streaming. You kind of get to sample each other's followers and gain some from that.
Wait, hang on one second. I just want to talk about that. If you are not familiar with that, that is one of my favorite features about Instagram. So if you go live and I go live with you, right, it notifies your followers. So all Aaron's friends get a note, hey, Aaron's going live right now. And all my friends get a note, hey, Daniel's going live right now. And then when they join, they see us together. So then they say, well, I trust Daniel and he seems to be pretty cool with Aaron. So what's Aaron all about? And there's some really good crossover that can happen there. So if you've never tried going live with someone, find someone who's in your niche and try to connect up with them for a live stream. I'm sorry for cutting you off, Aaron. Go ahead.
No, that's cool. That's cool. It's definitely a good point. I kind of was thrown into the Instagram live world. I had a guest. It's a rap. He's a rapper. His name's Hells Yeah. And his publicist was like, can you do an Instagram live video or Instagram live interview? I was like, I don't know. I've never done that before, but let's do this. Let's see if I can figure out a way to record it and so I can edit it as a podcast. And that was my first time. And that was like a pretty successful time right there. I gained a few followers from that. And, I haven't had as much success as when it's just me going live with the guests in the same room, just because, of course, you're not going to add as many followers when it's your audience that you're going with.
Sure. Totally makes sense. How has it been for you in terms of your podcast? Like, the thing I was thinking about when you were describing your podcast is, that sounds really valuable, especially if I was in that industry. But when I look at the profile that you have, it describes the podcast, but it didn't describe it the way you described it. You know what I mean? Have you thought about kind of maybe making that a little bit more clear on your profile?
I should probably go back and update it. It's been a while since I've updated my profile. It sounds terrible, but I'm not exactly sure on the exact wording of my profile right now.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, you mentioned the podcast, which, is right. I think that is a thing, and you have the link right to it, which, I think links on Apple or iTunes for the majority of podcast listeners. I mean, I don't have any demographic information, but I think the fact that you have it hosted there is going to cater to a lot of iPod people who are the kind of people who would listen to podcasts. I think that's smart. That's the right play. But it's not really obvious to me what your podcast is about, And even from my own personal experience, I'll tell you, when I first started a podcast, I called it the same thing as my website. And people would be like, what is your podcast about? And I'd be like, I interview people that I think are interesting. And they say, oh, okay. But then when I kind of relaunched my podcast, I said, okay, what's it going to be about? It's going to be 100% about Instagram. It'll be about how people are using Instagram, what they're doing with it, what I can learn from them, what ideas I can give them. And it's just going to be around that. So as much targeted focus as you can give it, I think it makes it more interesting to people if they know exactly what to expect when they listen to your podcast. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. So do you find the wording of my profile misleading or my bio misleading, or is it just not specific enough?
Yeah, it's just not specific. Like, I don't know what it's about, but if I was a person who was in the entertainment industry, I don't think it's readily apparent that this would benefit me, even though it would, right?
Yes. Okay, so I'll have to go in and reword that, or go in and kind of retool the wording to make it more representative of the podcast.
Right. I think that would be really good, because I actually really like some of the posts that you've made to highlight the various episodes. I think you have a really good theme going there. So it's recognizable that if you post this kind of post, it's referring to a new podcast episode. I think that's actually really smart, and that's exactly the way to do it. But it's just not 100% obvious to me what kind of podcast it is. And you work hard on it, right? You spend a lot of time to line up the guests and to make sure that it fits and it's going to be beneficial to your audience. But that's the thing that I would probably think about rephrasing a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Any key words you suggest I should put in there?
I think so when you told me about your podcast, you said it's for people in the entertainment industry. And I think you described it as, what do they wish they knew, or how did they keep going when they wanted to quit? I think those are all the words that I think you want to use in your profile to make it obvious, because people are in that situation. And then I think if you were to look for people who are in that situation, people who are actors who haven't had, their big break yet, or people who are musicians on SoundCloud who are just starting out and kind of reached out to those people and developed relationships with those people and followed those people and commented on those pictures, I think those are going to be your audience, because those are the people who are trying to figure it out. And to listen to someone who's maybe not 1,000 steps ahead, but like 10 steps ahead, I think is a really valuable thing, because it's not so overwhelming, right? Like sometimes I look at other people in my industry who are doing amazing things, and I'm never going to be there. But the person who's only like 5 steps ahead of me, I think, yeah, I could be there in like 6 months or a year. That's, that's more inspiring. So that's the area that I think I would look at for you.
Yeah, definitely. I was kind of thinking that, it's not only for this. I kind of have 2 aspects of it. I don't know if I should narrow my podcast down at all. I know this isn't necessarily an Instagram question, but how I have 2 aspects of it. One's like the conversational, like you're listening to WTF with Mark Maron or the Nerdist podcast with Chris Hardwick, where it's just a conversational interview. And then there's the Q&A section, I guess, as far as giving information to people who are getting started out in the entertainment industry. It almost seems like 2 entities, but I think they go well together.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I can't tell you exactly how to focus or what to do, but I think if anybody was going to listen to your podcast, they have to fit a specific type of person, right? They have to be whatever parameters you decide, that's who you want to be your listener. I think it has to cater 100% to that. Even for me, I'm divided the same way, probably a little too much. I say this podcast about Instagram, it's for people who are experts and share their secrets, and people who are just starting out. Because like I said before, if you look at somebody who's 100 steps ahead, sometimes it's overwhelming. So somebody who's just a couple steps ahead, you get ideas from and you learn from. And so I kind of do it 2 ways myself. But I think the more focused you are, the clearer it's going to be. One of the analogies that I use is to ask people, like, what's your favorite TV show? Like, if I asked you, what is your favorite TV show? What would you say?
I'd probably have to go with something like The Walking Dead right now.
Okay. Like my favorite show is 24, right? And so when you and I watch our favorite shows, we kind of expect the same thing, right? Like you expect the people to be running for their lives. I expect Jack Bauer to be chasing terrorists. If all of a sudden Jack Bauer was like doing a cooking show or, asking different questions than he normally asks about the, bombs or whatever, you'd be like, what is this? What's going on? So you want your same thing. You want consistency so that things make sense.
Yeah, definitely. I understand that completely. And I think there is quite a bit of that. And I think I'm trying to keep that consistency theme through my Instagram feed as well. But I'm also like trying to, instead of just show posts, I am trying to, put some, kind of show related, but kind of behind the scenes, or like me out in the doing stuff entertainment related, just so they can get to know me instead of just pictures of show art.
Right.
Does that make it more cluttered in your opinion, or does that make it more relatable? That's what I'm trying to find the line.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I'm actually working with someone right now to improve my own show art, because I think that is really key. I think it's going to be a balance, right? Like if you look at the last 6 posts or last 9 posts, some of it has to be about you and what you're doing, but some of it does have to be about the podcast or whatever it is that you're deciding to promote. So I think you have to find the balance that works, but I think people expect there to be some variety. I think people are expecting that there's going to be, not every post is 100% podcast related, because you're a person. You are not a podcast, right? You are a person, and people have lives and people have families and people go places and people do things. And that's okay. As long as it follows some sort of common thread and theme, like your favorite TV show, right? Like not every week are they running the exact same way and doing the exact same thing. You expect some variety in the show.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing.
Yeah, like if every episode was just about zombies or walkers and Walking Dead, it'd be a little repetitive. It's actually more about human drama than it is about the zombies. So yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. You got to have that human element to it.
Right, exactly. And I think the more that you can find ways to show that human element, like whether you're using stories or you're going live to show some of the behind the scenes stuff, I think that's what is really going to resonate with your audience, because they're seeing what it's like to go through the work that you put in into finding these guests, into finding people that can help them. I think that's going to resonate really well.
Awesome. So I got a question for you. Like you've been doing interviews about Instagram, talking to some experts and some people who are just getting started out. What would be some of the most actionable advice that you've received from somebody who's one of those experts?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So it's funny. I would say that the more attractive you can make your feed graphically and the more consistent it is, the better you're going to do. I was actually speaking to a lady today who's a social media strategist, and she works with real estate agents and people like that. And she was saying to use an app like Planoly, which is an app I've known about and I've used for a little bit before. But what you can do is plan out your posts a month in advance. So you can drag and drop, so you can order them by color or whatever you decide to do. It gives you the best chance to make a really attractive feed and line up your content really, really well. And then it'll auto post. So you set it to post Wednesday at 5 p.m. If you're doing something Wednesday at 5 p.m., that's cool because it's going to just post it for you anyway. So it kind of frees you up to do the things that you need to do instead of worrying about posting. Because I don't know about you, but like, I should have posted something today. Like, let me do it right now. But you can set it up for the time when your followers are most active, the times that make the most sense. So you can set that up and then focus on doing the things that you like instead of worrying about posting.
Oh yeah, that makes sense right there. Instead of trying to fit a post in between things and like, okay, I'll start a post here, finish it up over here, and you change what you're saying halfway in between.
Right, exactly. I would say that other tips are to use pictures that really show who you are as much as possible. And if you can't necessarily do that in pictures, use the captions for that. Some people do really long captions, and not everyone reads the captions. I mean, we're on Instagram for the pictures, right? But some people will take the time to read those captions. And so whether you decide to write them on the computer and then like email them to yourself or copy and paste it from a note on your phone or something like that, if you take the time to write that, people will read that.
Okay, yeah. So I've been trying to get a little bit more detailed in my stories or in my captions as well. If you look back at like my first posts, there's like barely anything written, hardly any hashtags, anything like that. And you can kind of, if you took the time to go through my feed, you could kind of tell where I started to, learn a little bit more about Instagram and how to, get more likes, more people looking at what you're posting.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's a learning process, right? It's not like one of those, you just throw it up and people will come. You have to really figure it out and work and understand how you work within the parameters of the system. Some people are super into doing it a certain way and you're like, yeah, but that's not me. I'm never going to do it that way. So you have to figure out what works in the way you view the world.
Yes. And, okay. So I was talking to you. I always get the name of these wrong. It's like, I call them exposure groups. You called them, I
call it engagement pod, but exposure group is probably just as descriptive. Tell people, for those who don't know, what that is.
Okay, so I actually found out about it on YouTube as I was doing a little research, going down rabbit holes and everything. But those groups are basically, you can create, like in the Instagram Messenger section of it, groups up to like 10, 15 people or something like that. And you typically want to find somebody around the same level as you are, so they're all getting the benefit from it. But when somebody posts, you message out to the group, everybody likes it and comments on it. I heard something like 4 words or more for the Instagram algorithm for it to get into I don't remember what the name of the section is where it shows the posts that are getting the most attention, but in the
Explorer page.
The Explorer page. I'm showing my noviceness right now.
No, that's all right. It's you explained it really well, actually, what an engagement group is or exposure group, and I do think that you can have some success with those, but it's definitely something that Instagram is watching from what I've seen. So if you find a group of people, maybe you find a Facebook group or whatever, I notice a lot of people are using WhatsApp or Telegram to have those conversations. So this way they're saying, not even using WhatsApp because Facebook owns WhatsApp, right? And Facebook owns Instagram, but taking that conversation as private as possible and then doing that. Some people have had success with that. I personally, that's not my particular style because say I'm busy or I'm working and doing something else, I'm not always going to be available to like the picture and write the comment. And if you have, 10, 15 people posting every day doing that, that's a significant amount of time. Not to say that you couldn't do it, absolutely, but you do have to give as much as you kind of expect, right? And actually you're giving, 13 times or 14 times more than you're getting, which is part of it. That's how the system works. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind and incorporate that into your day, which plenty of people do and have really good success with.
Yeah, it was something that sounded kind of interesting to me, as opposed to just trying to battle on your own to conquer all the followers, trying to gather all of them on your own with the exposure added to it. It seemed like something that would, it wouldn't hurt. It may help, it couldn't hurt you.
I would definitely look at if you found a group of people who was in your particular area, whether they did podcasts or whether they were in the entertainment industry, because I think working together, people are going to see those comments who are following them. They're going to see your comments and click over to your profile. So I think it kind of all goes together if you find the right group of people for what you're trying to do.
Okay. Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. So many things to learn.
There really is. So Aaron, if you can, please tell people where they can find you online, how they can listen to your podcast, and then tell us what you're going to be working on next.
All right. Yeah. So across all the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, it's at uncontainedpod. And then I also have a website, uncontainedpod.com, just trying to keep the symmetry there to make it easier to find me.
Good for you, man. Well, thank you so much for being on, Aaron. I really appreciate the time.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me. And I'd be happy to have you on my podcast so I can pick your brain a little bit more, because that's one of the beautiful things of podcasts. You can get advice from people that you might not talk to regularly.
So true. That's so true. All right, cool. Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great night.
That's all for today's episode. Now, you remember at the beginning, I promised you a something special at the end. I didn't say what it was. But if you leave me a review on iTunes and then send me a direct message with your email address, I will send you my 2019 guide to the Instagram algorithm. It's actually called Using the Instagram Algorithm to Market Your Product or Service. So if you're interested in that, leave me a review on iTunes, then send me a direct message with your email address and I'll get it right over to you. Thanks for listening. That concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you could just take a moment to go on the iTunes store or wherever you get podcasts and write a brief review of this podcast, I would really appreciate it, especially if it's positive. If you have some feedback, things that I should work on, please send me an email at daniel@danielhillmedia.com and I will respond as soon as I can. Thank you so much again for listening.
And that does it for me being interviewed on Uncontained. That was me as a guest on the Instagram Stories podcast, hosted by Daniel Hill. If you enjoyed the episode, please check out his podcast. He's got lots of other great interviews. And if you have questions about Instagram, that'd be a great place to at least get started looking for answers. So check him out on Instagram at Daniel Hill Media or at danielhillmedia.com. You can check out his website there, or wherever you listen to your podcast, you should be able to find his show as well. That's Instagram Stories. And while you're searching the World Wide Webs, please make sure you stop by uncontainedpod.com and also at uncontainedpod on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as well. Until next time, live uncontained.